됐죠? 네, 된 것 같아요.
I borrowed the book from your bag because I forgot my bag.
안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon. Welcome back to our symposium, Superhumanity, How Humans Design Themselves. We will now proceed to the next session. I'd first like to ask everyone to take their seats. Simultaneous interpretation is being provided, Korean on channel 1 and English on channel 2. I'd also like to ask you to put your mobile phones on the vibrate mode during this session. All the sessions are being live broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Nick Axel, the Deputy Editor of e-flux Architecture, who will be introducing the panel. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Jihoi. Thank you, everyone, for coming back for this afternoon to the last panel of Superhumanity's Soul. So we're going to steamroll forward on from the day, and hopefully we'll all be able to keep a continuous thread running through all of these. This incredibly powerful and dense keynote from Catherine Malibu will, I believe, here be able to be unfolded with some rather explicit cases of the remodeling of the self and of the human. So taking this plastic power into our hands, and I guess we can debate later whether it's actually revealing our flexibility or plasticity, but we shall see then. So we have three presentations this afternoon. The first is from Shim Kwanghyun, who's a professor, or who has been a professor of video theory at the Korean National University of Arts since 1996. Then we have a presentation by Igor Bragad and Miles Gertler from Common Accounts, which is a architectural practice based in between excellent data plans and broadband servers in between Seoul, Toronto, and New York. And lastly, we will have Erik Rietveld, who's a senior researcher at the University of Amsterdam and founding partner of RAF, Rietveld Architecture Art Affordances. Thank you very much. Sorry. I will call Shin to the stage. Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon. Professor Malibu, in the previous session, talked about a very important subject, and I think it would have been good to continue with the same topic and connect my topic with hers, but I was unable to do that with my presentation. I want to talk about the dialectics of stability and plasticity of the brain. And we talked about plasticity and flexibility and rigidity. And I would like to give you my opinion on the subject. Walter Benjamin, in The Origin of German Tragic Drama in the mid-1920s, quoted Goethe. And I also quote this often because we could think, what does brain science have to do with this subject? But I think it is very important. And quoting Goethe, he said, "Neither in knowledge nor in reflection can anything whole be put together, since in the former the internal is missing, and in the latter the external is missing. And so we must necessarily think of science as art if we expect to derive any kind of wholeness from it. Nor should we look for this in the general, the excessive, but since art is always completely represented in every individual work of art, so science ought to reveal itself completely in every individual object treated." Because these days, knowledge of the external and reflection of the internal is completely separated. My first question is, can we converge the two and bring them back together? So is it knowledge or is it reflection? That's not the point. These two are separated, like we separate what's outside of the skin and inside of the skin for humans. And we have the third-person perspective and the first-person perspective that is completely separated. And since the 18th century and in the 19th century, in art and in all the genres, the external and the internal have been separated. And modern scientists believe that this is natural and obvious. But not all living things can exist, because inside and outside of the skin, we need metabolism. But despite this fact, whether we study a discipline or whether we work in art, we separate the two. And Goethe mentioned something that seems very difficult, but something that also seems very obvious. And in the mid-18th century, Goethe wrote a lot, and it was a time when industrial capitalism developed greatly. And then for 200 years, capitalism propagated around the world, and the limitation of the capitalist formula is this formula. In the middle, we have capital, and then we have more money, and Marx in The Capital always talks about this formula. And in the middle, we have labor power. And we have nature, resource and energy, and means of production. And we have these three elements that meet, and they are all connected to make money. And this cycle moves faster and faster around the world. And in this process, nature and human beings become instruments and become a means of production. They have no internal elements. Everything is just external.
그래서 1인칭 관점에
And so we take out the first point of view, and artists resisted to this through their creations, and there was some resistance, but it began to replace the third-person point of view, began to replace the first-person point of view. But with the coming of the age of artificial intelligence, what we considered as a threat is something that we cannot accept any longer. Because we are living in the age of artificial intelligence, returning to Goethe's 200-year-old proposition is needed, because asking for the convergence of knowledge and reflection and of the outside and inside is too vague. And so it needs to be supplemented to respond to the threat of AI. And can AI replace scientific research? I mean, that's not the point. I think capital is being invested. A lot of capital is being invested for this right now. And philosophically and theoretically, is this right or wrong? That is not the point. We are living in this age. And how are we going to connect the external and the internal? And there have been a lot of debate about this. We talked about repetition and revenge a while ago. And Deleuze talked about difference and repetition. And revenge and plasticity, if we express it differently, is difference and repetition. In repetition, there are different types of repetitions. Repetition of difference and repetition of the same. If we can repeat the repetition of something that is different, then how can we execute this in our daily life? And if we can't do this, connecting the external and the internal is useless. Of course, we can have a long debate on the plasticity of the brain, but I'd like to talk about the theory of Mikhail Bakhtin and the theory of Gilbert Simondon and Michael Polanyi. They seem to have nothing in common, but I'd like to look at the external and the internal from their perspective. Bakhtin said the following: personification and objectification was what he mentioned. And in the ancient times, personification was important, but in the modern times, objectification of nature and human has become predominant. And today, personifying nature and the human without surrendering to objectification has become the norm. We have personified nature, and with the advent of AI, it's going to accelerate even more. And without giving up objectification, without returning to the past, without giving up the achievements of objectification, we have to personify the human and nature so that we can create a positive cycle. So internal personification and external objectification need to coexist. Then how can we do this? How can we create this positive cycle? Gilbert Simondon said a similar thing. Recently, Simondon's quotes and research on technology has been quoted a lot. Simondon is talking about technical activity, and he is talking about technical activity that stimulates the metabolism of human and the nature. And he talks about non-individuated beings and the individuality of individuated beings and trans-individuality. And these three things are important in science. And the relationship between the elements, and it's a philosophical study on the different elements. Inside the human, we have these three things. We have cells and organs, and inside the human, we have the trans-individuality, which is the social relationships. And through this, we can converge objectification and personification. And Polanyi, Simondon, talked about apeiron, which was from the Greek philosophy, which is the pre-individuation phase. And instead of using concepts that are vague and not very tangible, Polanyi introduced tacit knowledge. He talked about non-articulated tacit knowledge. It's something that we know, and Polanyi describes it in the following way. I know much more than what I can say with my words. So I know more than what I am expressing. And that was what he said. It's the opposite of what Wittgenstein said. What I cannot say, I don't need to say. What I don't know, I need to say, was what Wittgenstein said. And as an example of tacit knowledge, he gave an example of riding a bicycle, cooking, or doing laundry, washing, or the skill that a dentist has, and playing the piano. And if we look at all the processes, we cannot explain what we're doing, but we know how to do these things. And we cannot explain it with words. And the importance of tacit knowledge is what Polanyi was saying. So we cannot talk about the non-individuated contact that we have with everything, but it's related with our perception, and it's also related to the electronic circuits of our brain. And we can only transform tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge in a small way. And where do we get this tacit knowledge? According to Polanyi, it comes from the evolution of animals, and he divided it into 3 parts. First, we have the trick exercise learning based on inherent mobility, which is invention. Second, it is the symbol learning based on the power of perception, learning, and observation. And thirdly, it's the activity of interpretation. And with the evolution of animals, disciplines were able to be developed. And in the case of language, which we connect with these 3 activities, we are able to develop inventions, and we are able to develop engineering and technology, and we are able to develop natural science and mathematics, logic, mathematical physics, and even philosophy. But with tacit knowledge, which is transformed into explicit knowledge, sometimes it just floats around. And if this process of separation continues, then the person who is studying these disciplines, they will separate quest for knowledge and self-justified satisfaction. So if the 2 are separated, quest for knowledge and self-justified satisfaction can also be separated. Then the existential meaning of tacit knowledge and the referential meaning will see a distance between the 2, and we will self-contradict ourselves. This self-contradiction originates from some kind of misguided intellectual fervor. And this is something that nobody can acknowledge. And we see a vision of the cosmos that excludes ourselves, because no human can be acknowledged. And in this cosmos, no one can create and sustain scientific value. And in this universe, there will be no science, and science will disappear. This is what Polanyi said. Polanyi is not that well known in Korea, but in the 1950s and 60s, he was a scientific philosopher who developed a lot of theories, and Thomas Kuhn's paradigm theory was based on Polanyi's theories that came out in the 1950s, and so he played a very important role. Le Corbusier in the 1940s said that scientists will disappear because of artificial intelligence. And paradoxically, he predicted it, and he was very critical about this too. But AI is actually moving in this direction. Whether we are critical or whether we are championing it, it is moving in this direction. And our body performs 4 things. We have kinetic energy, we have ears and eyes to sense and recognize, and we set and modify plans through our deductive abilities, and we have muscles to execute our goals. And so we have 4 major bodily functions. And in the case of human beings, we have all of these functions that we can do in one body. But in the case of robots or AI, we don't need to put them in one body. We can combine these 4 resources separately. And it's 2 to the power of 4, so 16 combinations are possible. The human being has to have 4 activities in one body, but in a robot, like a transformer, it's not the same. Many philosophers think that AI will be executed through androids and we'll be able to have a conversation with them, but it's just one of the 16 combinations. And capital is investing in other areas except from this. And Peretti, in 21st Century Capitalism, said that accumulated capital that can be used, if we exclude all the labor that exists right now, will be able to create a lot of capital. And 30 conglomerates have more than 60% of all the wealth and capital in Korea. And they are investing in AIs and robots, in systems. So how can we respond to this situation? Labor is disappearing, is vanishing. What are we going to do about labor is not the point. We see a lot of statistics about jobs disappearing. And we need to look at why this has happened and why we have separated the external and the internal. Intellectuals have thought it was natural, and for 200 years, philosophy has been studying this separately, and we need to reinterpret all of this. And I'm not going to give you an answer, but I'd like to just throw you the question. Polanyi talked about the ontology of commitment and said that we needed to come up with a new type of discipline, which is the ontology of commitment. And he said that biology could help. Tacit knowledge in their development and in their propagation, it's a biological process. And so animal intelligence, impulse, perception, operating principles, we have to think about how to connect all of this. And when Polanyi announced this, biology was not as advanced as it was today. It was 50 years ago. We had not been able to dissect and analyze the human brain, and the Genome Project was still not completed. And we already have a 4D map of the human brain today. And they only looked at brain maps from a very unexpert point of view. Gerald Edelman also did a lot of work on this, and he said it's very complicated, but simply put, in our brain, we have the reptilian brain, and we have in one part of our brain the production of hormones, and inside the neocortex we are able to look at the external world, and they are integrated in the brain through one circuit. And he came out with a very systematic explanation of this. And if you go into the internet, you'll be able to see a drawing of this. And as you can see here, we have the self and the non-self, and we have the limbic system and the hypothalamus, and we have the hippocampus. And inside our brain cannot distinguish between the external and the internal. Only the functions come together and then divide, and can be divided later on. And on one side, we have the language abilities and the non-language abilities, and we have a two-track system. And for about 200 years, we have been discussing this. Is culture and art predominant or superior or less important? And it's just one of the many variables. And if we look at the next picture, We have the two-track system, and if we connect it, we can have 4 variables with language-centric thinking and the non-language-centric thinking. And we talk about unconsciousness, and unconsciousness is still consciousness. We're not just aware of it. And in 0.25 seconds, we cannot be conscious of what our brain is doing. But our thalamus and thalamocortical system, in a 50 millimeter second, they move, and we are unable to be conscious of it. And we have a virtuous cycle of 2 consciousness, which is carried out. So that's why our brain is very complicated. But we just keep on dividing this and segregating this and reverting this in order to create many sub-disciplines. And for about 10 years, 20 years, this is the only way that we think. Philosophers only think with language, and artists only think with images. And everybody uses their 2-track, 3-track, 4-track. They can use their 2, 3, 4-track circuits, but they don't. And if you don't use it, then they die. And you will be hit with Alzheimer's or dementia. And so when we look at our total brain, I mean, I don't have much time, so I can't go into detail, but we have to find a way to use our whole brain, all of our brains. Let me move on to this picture. And I'm sure you've seen this before. This is how our brain has evolved. We have the brainstem hypothalamus. This is the reptilian brain. It has evolved. And even if we want to throw it away, we cannot unless we cut off our brain. And then we have the neocortex in our brain, and the external and internal meet within the limbic system. It's our emotions and feelings. Feelings and emotions are triggered by our limbic system. And emotions and feelings is feeling something, evaluating something. It's an emotional movement. And all these 3 brains are forever going round and around. And another picture I would like to show. We have the front brain and the back brain, and the left brain and the right brain. And within our brain, we have a 3D system. We have the right brain, left brain, back brain, and front brain. And they are doing different things. We have the triune brain, and the triune brain connects the external and the internal. And here, the front part of our brain takes part of simulation, and the back brain is responsible for actions. It simulates actions, and in the back brain, the external world which is simulated, is it accurate or not, is what it perceives. So our hand moves and takes action, but is also perceived as such. And it's very difficult to do. Let me give an example of baseball. Whether you know baseball well or not, go to play baseball. You have a bat, and you see the ball coming to you, and then in several seconds, you have to decide when you are going to hit the ball. And usually, you are unable to hit the ball correctly. And so this is the process of evolution, and we have evolved in a way that we cannot, strike correctly. And in school, students and children are not really able to use this function. So if they perceive, they're unable to put it into action. And if they are able to put it into action, they have a less acute perception. And so that has become problematic. So what are we going to do in this situation? I think we need to draw a new map of our brain. This is different from what brain scientists have drawn. They draw very detailed circuits, but I prefer a conceptual mapping of our brain. We need to connect everything in the brain, and we need to make our brain more plastic so that blood can circulate. We have to create an electronic explosion. And this is what I have shown through my diagrams. So through a group of neurons, we have to try to connect everything together. Our brain is a network. And there are three types of networks, network architectures in our brain. Usually, we only think about the first one, the centralized network, or the decentralized or distributed network. And they're separated, and we turn the light on and off. But the one in the middle, the decentralized or scale-free network, when we use it the most actively, we become the most creative. There has been research on this. And so we have to connect the external and the internal, the top and the bottom, in order to move towards this decentralized network. For the details, please refer to my paper. And this is my last drawing. Here we have the left brain, the right brain, and on the bottom we have the body, we have the intuition, we have judgment, reason, and the 5 different senses. And on the dotted lines, on the black dotted lines, what is this part? It's the functions that are being developed by AI, copying our brain. So calculation, knowing how to calculate, how to deduct, and there's a lot of investment in sensors of AI and unconscious perception. So at 100 milliseconds or 5 milliseconds, there's been research that's trying to develop the sensory perception of robots and AI, prosthetics, for example. And in movies like Her, we have categorized 100 different types of emotions and put them in a machine. And so AI is developing this part of the brain. It's the part that is connected with the external world. And as Coswell said, this is going to become reality. As Coswell predicted, most of what he predicted has become true at the beginning of the year 2000. And everybody is making big investments on how to treat external information. But what is connected with desire, impulse, and feelings, what Kant has called judgment, reflective judgment, nothing has been much done on this with AI because it's difficult, it's complicated. And if I were to calculate this simply, we have 16 different types of functions, and AI is focusing on 6. And there are 16 combinations that they are working on. But if we think about ourselves, we have 13 nodes inside our body, and they're all different. And many scientists like Edelman say it's wider than the sky, the width and the breadth of this network. 6 to the power of 6 means that 64 combinations can be developed through AI. Then if this is true, as Polanyi mentioned, maybe we need to think about 2 to the power of 13. Then we can have more than 8,000 combinations that can come out. and 8,000 types of plasticities can be developed through the brain's scale-free network. And the brain will be able to become plastic by connecting everything together. Of course, we cannot just calculate this with numbers, and this is a very complicated and complex process, but we are moving in this trend. And in humanities or philosophy or social science, when we look at research that is done on the human brain, everything is connected with this very complex and complicated network. It's no longer separated. So let me conclude. The picture that I showed you before was the structure, the scaffolding of the brain. It's very structured, and it was structured and it evolved with time. I cannot change it, even if I want to. But this network of the brain is plastic. One is structure and one is dynamic. One is plastic. And dialectically, these two are connected. We cannot disconnect it. If the structure has a problem, the plasticity is challenged. And if the plasticity is challenged, then the structure can come in and help. Of course, we can talk about a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, or we can talk about being deadlocked. We can think about many different types of systems, but we need to develop these systems together. And philosophy, that has been a discipline that has studied the internal part of the human. Philosophy needs to study the inside, the internal part of the brain in order to reconstruct and refigure it. If not, we are going to continue to talk about abstract things while AI will develop at a momentous pace. And so Professor Malibu talked about revenge and repetition. I wanted to talk about repetition and difference based on what Deleuze said in the 1960s. And repetition and difference, I tried to look at it from a brain science point of view. I was trying to connect Deleuze with brain science. I thought that that would be more productive. I'm not negating what Professor Malibu said, but I would like to continue the discussion. And the word superhumanity, I don't like this word. I don't like the word transhumanity either. And there was another word that was proposed. And I would like to propose 인간, which is a Chinese word, the human being. And many Westerners know Chinese words these days too. 인간, in is human. So it means two people are supporting each other. And kan, the second word, means that there's a door in a temporal sense, and the door is open. And when the door opens, sunshine can come in and people's words can come in. And so if we translate it, it's existence in between. There is existence in between indoors. There is existence in between the earth and the sky. And so we try to explain this with individuality and non-individuality, which is very complicated. But let's talk about human beings. There is nothing that signifies human being as well as human being. Human beings are different from animals. And so 인간, the Chinese word for human being, I think is a better word.
What you're saying is extremely interesting, but will be perfect in the conversation together. What I'm afraid is we will not have a chance to listen to the other speakers. I apologize, but I also think that your last remarks are so beautiful. They should be really done together with a group, if you don't mind.
Yes, I've taken up too much time, so I think we will be able to debate upon these questions. Thank you.
심광현 교수님께서 아까 말씀.
Thank you very much, Professor Shim. He talked about plasticity, and he structurally analyzed the human brain structure. Now I'd like to introduce the speakers from Common Accounts to make their presentation.
So we need to talk here to the microphone. Hi. Death is a plastic force.
Operating through communication channels and grounded in a culture of image sharing, domestic spin-off technologies in which death is embedded have engendered a new human body, one that contains within itself ceremonies for the deceased and counterpart sites for a new type of cemetery.
These memorials are embedded in modifications of the body itself as auto-performative rituals.
In a reflexive mode, this instrumentalization of death and its memorial body shapes and is shaped by architectural contexts of domesticity, introducing a unique series of consequences, such as typological twinning, programmatic promiscuity, and physiological transmutations in otherwise ordinary sites like the bathtub, living room, and the bedroom.
Upon Whitney Houston's death, Bobbi Kristina Brown inherited the entirety of her mother's estate. 1 month following the death of Whitney, Bobbi Kristina told Oprah Winfrey that the morning after her mother's body was discovered, she moved back into Houston's Atlanta home, having felt encouraged to do so in communion with her mother's spirit. "I have to carry on the legacy," she said. "We're going to do the singing thing, some acting, some dancing." 3 years and 4 months after her mother's own drug-induced drowning, Bobbi Kristina was found face down in a bathtub, where Whitney's death at age 48 in the bathroom of Suite 434 of the Beverly Hilton Hotel had been deemed as an accidental drowning aided by the effects of heart disease and the use of cocaine. Bobbi Kristina's was suspected to be a deliberate act, restaging her mother's demise in a bathroom.
Gottfried Semper, musing on the idea of plasticity in the mid-19th century, observes that our language lacks a general and comprehensive expression for all the arts whose common material basis or primeval material is potter's clay. That is, those arts whose common primeval techniques consists of giving form and shape to a plastic soft paste. After Whitney's death, Bobbi Kristina's life can be understood as a period of self-fluidity, a plastic remodeling into her mother's image. Bobbi Kristina's suicide and the reignition of the media zeitgeist that would ensue is her ultimate attempt to confirm herself as an extended memorial to the maternal pop star, as sacrificial tribute and twin event.
Clay takes precedence in Semper's understanding of the plastic process of form making because clay, as he said, was the first material to be used for this technique, and because clay, as the first plastic material, to some extent established the style to be followed for other materials later. Clay, thus, stands for any material substance conducive to shaping in a soft state. In this sense, we could understand the design of the human bodies, Bobbi Kristina's included, as an analogous mode of plastic design. Unlike Semper's pottery, the design of the human in the face of death never culminates in a fixed instantiation, but rather functions in a state of constant fluidity. Bobbi Kristina's body continued to evolve past her immersion of the tub. First, as a semi-resuscitated organism on hospital life support, then as a cadaver in fluid processing in the embalming chamber of a funeral home, next as a cosmetically enhanced corpse in an open casket funeral, and then finally as an image circulated again and again in print and online tabloids.
Nonetheless, Semper's consideration of death remains compelling. He claims the plastic practice of ceramics is one of vessel making, and points to the reciprocal origins of both the tub and sarcophagus and the urn and the canopic vase, claiming them as simultaneously archetypal instruments of death, ritual, sustenance, and hygiene. And indeed, in the final act before her biological expiration, Bobbi Kristina recast her bathtub as a sarcophagus, just as Whitney did. Healing and decay, or the reconstruction of the body of the living and the extension of death, lie on a fluid scale and inhabit the same artifacts, spaces, and technologies in these cases. All this places these trans-biological instruments, extending between the living and the non-living, into the domestic realm. Bobbi Kristina's hygienic sarcophagus, like her mother's, was provided by a uniquely domestic architecture. Furthermore, Bobbi Kristina's extended memorial to her mother, the adoption of her properties, the ambitions to mimic her career, and the rehearsal of her death from 3 years prior, required an architecture of domesticity and the personal effects it housed.
In Facebook's first significant encounter with death, we can observe a related case of extended memorial via body transformation facilitated by an architecture of domesticity. John Berlin, here in the photo, was a middle-aged, overweight, married father of 3 in a trailer home in Arnold, Missouri. On January 28, 2012, his 21-year-old son Jesse died unexpectedly to unknown causes on his sleep. That same year, John Berlin started a YouTube channel and began posting videos of day-to-day activities, many featuring kids, which documented the months following Jesse's death and the subtle ways in which it started to mobilize changes around the Berlin family home.
A few months after Jesse's death, John discovered the Insanity Physical Fitness program, developed by Santa Monica-based Beachbody LLC. Confronted with his death, Berlin turned to exercise to reverse the effects that a sedentary lifestyle had had on his 44-year-old body. On September 15, 2013, John posted his first fitness-oriented video, showing him competing in an obstacle course race, and 1 month later, he began posting videos of insanity workouts in his trailer home living room. And by December, he announced he was taking on clients as a trainer in that same living room, now outfitted with an ad hoc memorial to his son, Jesse, on the room's back wall.
So 2 years after his son's death, John posts his first viral video, in which he makes a plea to Facebook for a look-back video of his dead son's account. The look-back video format, a slideshow of greatest hits from a user's virtual material, was a result of Facebook's 10th anniversary celebrations. An emotional Berlin wanted Facebook to generate such a video from the material he didn't have access to of his son's account and share it with him. And after logging 2 million viewers in a couple of days, Berlin received a call from Mark Zuckerberg, granting his request and announcing an immediate Facebook review into Facebook's policies towards memorialization and the accounts of dead users.
In the background of the plea video, Berlin's living room has been further transformed. His son's memorial wall has been replaced by floor-to-ceiling mirrors, revealing sports equipment behind the camera and confirming the space as a gym and Berlin as a trainer. The viewer, in turn, became a participant in Berlin's mourning. And his Facebook page and YouTube video comment feeds, too, came to operate as a social platform for others to commiserate and mourn their own deaths.
Berlin's body transformation mirrors the programmatic promiscuity of his living room, both which served as an act of memorialization. Death has long since been moved beyond the cemetery, and new opportunities in remains disposition technologies, ceremonial protocols, and the prospect of the virtual afterlife demand collective attention. Death is perhaps most evident today online, where lack of design regularly lets death come to the fore in ways that are increasingly unresolved. The fluidity of the body between material and digital domains fosters its own self-reflexive agency. Yet, in order for a body to operate in the afterlife, participation in the socio-political systems of the living is needed, and granted through mundane and bureaucratic mechanisms. The afterlife endures as long as it efficiently replicates and remains present along structuring conditions of the living. Thus, the deceased can only be eternally ceremonialized as long as they are able to occupy and transform real estate, virtual state, and the human body. And they remain culturally and financially productive. The extension of death into life can only persist as long as the defunct body is able to mobilize value.
The catalog of Hans Hollein's Man Transforms exhibition of 1976 asserted that there are mainly two fields of man's activity: to survive during life and to survive after life. The reason we engage design is, Hollein proposed, to live and to die and possibly to live beyond death, which presciently describe the condition of the virtual afterlife and the persistence of life's digital remains after the point of biological expiration. But it also describes the way technologies foster transformations of the body indiscriminately, in both life and in death. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a structuring cloud diagram for Hollein's exhibition featured the central figure of the body. Among the few interrelated subjects that orbited around it were redesigning the man, body, building, and death. Self-design is among those transformations which provide the extension of life after death and the survival, twinning, transmutation, or upgrading of the body. While the cases of John Berlin and Bobbi Kristina Brown operate through contemporary mechanisms, Semper provides a corresponding case from the early industrial period.
Semper's 1852 design for the hearse of the funeral parade of the first Duke of Wellington rematerialized the war hero into a mobile architectural vessel at the heart of London. His design represented the spoils of the Duke's greatest triumphs, 18 tons of bronze cannons captured from his victory at Waterloo, melted down to form the body of the carriage. The Duke was reinstantiated as a mobile architecture to equip him with a literal visibility to match the celebrity in which he had lived as hero and public figure. The parade drew an audience of 3 million, on par with John Berlin's viral video, and spawned spin-off celebrations and markets along the course. Hollein's theory of death surviving extra-human transformations only hold as long as the living mobilizes prosthetic and extra-human upgrades towards the construction and their subsequent participation in economies and societies extended for the afterlife. Once death, continued participation in society is what ensures survival, fosters ceremony, and provides existence simply by remaining ever active, ever transforming.
Not only is one's afterlife a design project within the domain of the living, but its very existence is described by the precondition of access and influence between virtual and material channels. John's memorials to his son are only possible because he and Jesse participated in social networks online. The virtual afterlife of Jesse Berlin has been formed largely by John's actions and the series of events following Jesse's biological death. That is, the level of resolution of its archive, the person it approximates, how they are, how they look, and how well that accounts for the actual lived profile of Jesse Berlin is a product of several factors in which he himself has no hand.
This kind of virtual and material reflexivity via integrated prosthetic enhancement is perhaps nowhere more apparent today as it is in the world of the most active plastic surgery district in Gangnam. The modern Korean plastic surgery industry originated in the wounded bodies of the Korean War. In the 1950s, American reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Ralph Millard, began a program of physiognomic reconstructions on survivors of the conflict, which led to the development of new procedures not rooted in the ethos of repair, but of enhancement. His invention of the double eyelid surgery rapidly gained notoriety and is to this day among the most popular surgeries that one can find in Gangnam. Gangnam comprises a sophisticated infrastructure, medical, bureaucratic, urban, and digital, that softens the subject. It promotes a cellular, nutritional, and identity fluidity, both physical and legal. The architectural, infrastructural, and urban technologies of the district, here understood as the attendant technologies that allow participation in the shape of urbanism throughout the process of surgery, before, during, and post-op recovery, designed the human as a parallel operation to those involving the surgeon's scalpel. The noses, eyelids, and jawlines demand a protocol across the scales. Tubing, smoothies, neck pillows, automated beds, cushion bands, hotel rooms, convenience stores, beauty salons, and shopping centers are the technological and urban counterparts to bloggers, nurses, administrators, and custom agents required along the way.
The late 1990s and early 2000s marked the period of consolidation of plastic surgery clinics between Gangnam and Sinsa subway stations in Seoul. At the time, Cyworld Virtual Homes in 1999 and Daum Cafe, also in the same year, the first Korean social media computer programs based on the construction of an avatar or a new self, and Naver Knowledge Search in 2002, YouTube in 2005, and Facebook in 2006 became part of the daily life of millions in South Korea. At the beginning of the new millennium, when clinic towers began to reach a critical mass, participation in virtual worlds multiplied, Koreans could design their avatars with equal fluency in both material and digital worlds. Gangnam is an ecosystem of both radical and mundane logistics for body processing, in a context where youth cultures engage in casual worship of the image of the body. It constitutes a cosmetic urbanism, where the technologically enhanced face of the patient becomes yet another televisual surface for reprogramming and playback. The transmedia exchange of images traveling freely between billboards, screens, and faces demands a sophisticated set of design protocols.
The fluidity that Gangnam promotes is the result of a deliberate techno-urbanism instrumentalized toward the redesign of the human body. The public video diaries of East Asian beauty bloggers hired to advertise clinics through their own surgeries reveal the overabundance of cellular fluidity of and the microviolence of the surgical procedures.
The district's cosmetic skyscrapers are unique socio-technological ensembles that simultaneously engage extreme conditions of radical isolation and hyperconnectivity. The towers isolate themselves on the outside with ornamented and screened facades, masking any external reading of the clinic interiors, and by consolidating retail and pharmaceutical programs within, reducing the need for clients to leave and engage the neighborhood. In contrast, the fluidity and connectivity that the plastic surgery towers demand in the city's public realm are critical to their survival. In Korea, the most and fastest web-connected country in the world, an extreme body consciousness and the rate at which body images circulate in social media have pushed clinics like Regen Plastic Surgery to redirect advertising from subways, streets, and buses instead to KakaoTalk groups, YouTube vlogs, Daum forums, baby talk posts, and Instagram micro-celebrities. The urban space for casual encounter, discussion, and participation in an outward display of a consciously photogenic lifestyle might as well be located thousands of kilometers away from Gangnam. The bedroom of an Indonesian, Singaporean, as is the case in this image, or Chinese lifestyle blogger is one of the key backdrops where the cosmetic agora opens.
The paradoxical condition of the simultaneous social hyperconnection and physical isolation collapses in a single architectural space, the lobby. This is the site where aspirations for enhancement, both individual and collective, virtual and physical, collide. Traditionally understood as the space for sociality, as well as the portal that welcomed the urban realm into the building, the ground floor lobby of the plastic surgery tower is now a residual space, entering a minimum amount of public interface. At the street level, the 16th-story BK tower has a single 4.5 square meter lobby. The 15th floor Regen Clinic is accessed by a 1.4 meter wide corridor. The lobby no longer has to occupy a storefront space since most patients are know exactly where they're headed after having made their appointments online. Many clinic website menus match those of their elevators, adopting the building section as a navigational framework. The virtual realm has obviated the need to materially appeal to the passerby. Although plastic surgery is somewhat a public affair in Seoul, hidden lobbies keep the fluid patients well within the procedural confines of the tower and out of reach of the plastic forces of the neighborhood, effectively reproducing the virtual communities the clinics seek to foster with blog-based endorsement and day-by-day patient diaries. Gangnam's online participation amounts to the form of reality television, a web series with consultation, surgery, and recovery rooms as a set for the patient's performance.
This leaves us wondering, how can the ritualistic condition of the prosthetic body be mined for new urban protocols of the everyday? How might ceremonialized transformations of the body produce new opportunities for the production of value? And what is architecture's role in the redesign of the body, living and dead, in an age of constant self-fashioning?
The human body is not only the site for design, but a simultaneous instrument for the instant and reflexive design of its own prostheticized environment and image.
That is the nature of Semper's vessel, whether as an avatar, bathtub, trailer home, carriage, clinic bed, or blogger bedroom.
In this mode of plastic reflexivity, the human is enlisted as a design agent that initiates a productive reciprocity between body, other bodies, and the techno-urban ecology.
And this characterizes self-design in these cases, precarious operativity on a fluid spectrum between death and healing, a condition in between destruction and regeneration. Thank you.
Thanks.
Common accounts 두 분 강연 재밌.
Thank you. Common accounts. Next, I'd like to invite Erik Rietveld to give his lecture. And Erik is going to talk about affordance design.
For the invitation. As was announced, I'm a philosopher of embodied cognitive science. And I'm co-founder of a studio called RAF, which made, for instance, this sculpture. I'll tell a bit about both practices, both the philosophy and the making process. Embodied cognitive science is a field that tries to take seriously the way people actually experience the world, the skills that people acquire by engaging in sociocultural practices, and that we always bring the skills that we have into the situations where we are, and that the spaces in which we are also make a big difference to the kind of behavior that we perform. What I will be focusing on is the question, what is enactive architecture? Lessons from embodied cognitive science for makers. And I will approach it from our own practice, from the practice of RAF and the way we engage in making architectural art installations. So first, the notion of affordances. Affordances are the possibilities for action that the environment offers. So for instance, the microphone for its speaking in, a pen for its writing with, and what you see here is a guy who is responding to the possibility of a chair to sit on. It comes from the beautiful movie The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces by William White. And what you see is that he's basically responding to the action possibility of a chair to sit on, like all of you have done before when you went to sit there. And he's also holding an ice cream at the same moment. What is important is to remember the concept. The affordances are the possibilities for action that the environment offers, because it will come back continuously in the talk. There's also social affordances. These are a subcategory, possibilities for social interaction that the environment offers. Like, for instance, the extended hand offers the possibility to shake it. Now, what you see also in this image is that he's coordinating not only with the chair when he went to sit down, but also with the ice cream. And he was also moving the chair a bit to an appropriate distance, already anticipating that someone could arrive. So we engage not with one affordance at the same time, but with multiple affordances in any particular situation. Like you now maybe listening to me and maybe making notes and are engaging with a chair. These are 3 examples of affordances you are engaging with at the moment. Now, skilled intentionality, which is the topic of the philosophical research project that my team and I do at the University of Amsterdam, skilled intentionality is just this phenomenon of coordinating with multiple affordances simultaneously. And we do it all the time. Now, this engaging with affordances is not something that's static, but it's dynamic. And I'll show you another fragment from William Wright's documentary to show that. Here are some guys during lunch break, very machismo, hanging on their square. And they are being announced by William Wright by saying, here are the girl watchers. So you see them watching the girls that are for being looked at. And you see how they basically are watching the girls during their lunch break. And what is interesting is if you look at this guy's head, that it's only turning when it's socially appropriate. So the way we engage with action possibilities is socially responsive, like we do it in appropriate ways. That's why you went to sit there, and none of you went to sit on these chairs, except for the ones who were invited to do so. The philosophical question that we are working on is, can we understand all the things people do skillfully in terms of engaging with affordances? So both mundane sitting on chairs or grasping a pen, and complex actions that are typically described as higher cognition, like architects making something, architects designing a building. And we approach it as trying to see if we can understand these different kinds of actions, all in terms of skilled engagement with the affordances offered by the environment, as forms of skilled intentionality. Now, for that, we need to work with on the notion of affordances. It comes from ecological psychology. James Gibson coined it. And more specifically, we need to situate the notion of affordances in the human form of life in order to deal with these more complex kind of actions like designing buildings. So we've basically proposed to redefine affordances, to stretch it as relations between aspects of the social material environment. So this is an aspect of the social material environment. This is one. This is one. There's many, many aspects of the social material environment around us. And on the other hand, the abilities available in a form of life. Now, if you take seriously this definition of affordances, then you will see that we are situated in a very rich landscape of affordances, a very resourceful landscape of affordances, because there's many, many different aspects of the environment all around us, and there's many different abilities in many different socio-cultural practices available in the human form of life. So together this creates the rich landscape of affordances that makes up our ecological niche. And new tools like diving equipment, for instance, basically can open up new worlds. They basically extend the landscape of affordances we can engage with and we can explore. So the abilities that are available in the form of life that are contributing to this rich landscape of affordances are also the skills of specialists like architects or like psychiatrists or like surgeons. And that contributes to this richness, as do the skills we have for language use, also contributing to the richness of the landscape of affordances. It offers you the possibility, for instance, to ask me a question afterwards. Now, RAF, our studio, it's a multidisciplinary studio working at the intersection of visual art, architecture, and philosophy. And we basically make art installations. And the philosophy is the philosophy of affordances that I've just been explaining briefly. I want to show you how we try to think from affordances and from the richness of the landscape of affordances and from exploring the richness of the landscape of affordances when we try to imagine how we can change existing sociocultural practices. I will do this with two projects, and the first of them is The End of Sitting. Basically, what we were trying to do is to offer a real-life thinking model for the office of the future. For an office in which we don't just standardly sit as we do nowadays. Because as many of you may know, sitting too much is quite unhealthy. If you sit 11 hours a day, you run 40% higher risk of dying in the next 3 years than if you sit 4 hours or less. So sitting is something that we do all the time. You've been doing it all day. You continue to do it, even though you know that it's unhealthy. I'm telling you. And that's, of course, because it's so habitual, and we are basically embedded in a sitting society, a society where we sit from early in the morning in the car to work, during the day at the university, and back at home in front of TVs and laptop computers. Now, can we change an entire society to move from a sitting society to a society that lives diagonally or horizontally, but not based on sitting? That's basically the challenge we posed ourselves. Now, of course, then we shouldn't continue putting children in a corner and punish them with standing. That's one of the ways where it's already going wrong, of course. But more importantly, what I would like to show is how we were basically making an entire new environment that is not filled with chairs. There's no chairs in the end of sitting installation that we built, of which you see here an image. But it's all sorts of affordances for supported standing. So the guy here, he's not sitting, he is supportedly standing. And if you would completely take out all the chairs here, then you would either sit on the floor, which is quite likely in Korea, or you would start to hang and lean on different objects. Now, basically, we've been exploring this landscape of affordances, which offer many different possibilities that are attuned to the bodies. So, for instance, it goes from lower to higher to facilitate the fact that we have different body sizes. And so there's an optimal position for everyone. But what is interesting, all the different positions are only temporarily comfortable. At some point, your leg muscles, which is your biggest muscle group and which you need to use if you want to live more healthy, at some point your leg muscles will get tired, and that will make you move to one of the different positions. So she will move at some point from here, perhaps to laying down there or to hanging there. Therefore, it needs to be an entire landscape of action possibilities for standing. Now, this way of thinking basically materializes a philosophical worldview. And this philosophical worldview has been articulated in the skilled intentionality framework. And that basically suggests that we need to think of humans and their environment as being a coupled system, an integrated system. And behavior that emerges is an aspect of this coupled system of the, a coupled system, I want to go on further, yeah. A coupled system of the skilled individual, there and the ecological needs. And in any situation, we coordinate with multiple affordances simultaneously. Now, the way we went to this art installation is by exploring the action possibilities that are often already available, but that we just ignore. So we asked ourselves the question, what would be available to support standing and working standing? Now, these are some of the research experiments we did, and just that we started at the studio of the visual artist we collaborate with, Barbara Visser, and we just explored what could work, what might be comfortable positions that don't use chairs. And we found this one. This was really comfortable to read, and you see them pushing him in an optimal angle for working standing. And once we found such an optimal position, we fixated it. And we explored more, and then we found that if you lift up the floor to support the feet, it will be far more comfortable to lean back and hang. Now, this entire process can be described in what philosopher Merleau-Ponty called the tendency towards an optimal grip. It's basically the phenomenon that once you know it, you will see it everywhere in life, that if you try to, say, grasp this object here, your hand is moving to an optimal position to grasp it. And if you want to read a text, say the text written there on the poster, you will move to an optimal position to read it. You will move to an optimal position from between persons in the elevator if you're sharing a space with them. So there's always this tendency for living beings to improve their relationship to the situation and to deal with what is lacking in the situation. And what is lacking basically makes action possibilities relevant to that will help you to get a better grip on your situation. You see Muhammad Ali here while training, he moves to a position where he's able to do the different punches that he can do on the heavy bag. So he's moving to what in technical terms is called an optimal metastable zone, where you're able to switch very rapidly between the different action possibilities. It's the zone where basically the boxing bag may determine what happens next, because Muhammad Ali is ready for all the different punches that the heavy bag offers him, for all the different affordances. And that's because he's skilled, of course, and he brings his skills into this situation. It's embodied skills he brings there. Now, we continue exploring, improving our grip on the end of sitting project. And here you see that we offered this support for laptops so that it became even more comfortable to work standing, and you forget actually that you're standing. And these are the prototypes that we built. I think experimenting one-on-one with real human beings is quite crucial if you want to change a practice. So I can recommend it. Build it one-on-one and experiment and see what happens. It also helps you to visualize. Once you have this, you have a common ground to discuss and to say what should be changed. And it also helps you to imagine the future if you have such materialized models. So this helped us to materialize, to imagine together what we would be building in the future, which wasn't there yet at that point. This is the space where we built the End of Sitting installation, an art gallery in the center of Amsterdam. And here you see the entire sculpture that offers all the different action possibilities. This is how you entered the space, and people were immediately invited to step on it and then explore further what was there, and hang and lean in different ways. There's also spaces underneath for those who don't like to be out in the open. And you can there via these holes. Then we sent a cutout of the installation to the Architecture Biennale in Chicago, because we also wanted to have people in other continents be able to explore it. So it was just a small selection of the different affordances for supported standing that went to Chicago, but still it worked, and people could try it out, and that helped also to generate the media attention, which you need if you want to change a socio-cultural practice. So if you want to change our society from a sitting society to one that supports standing, then we need a lot of media attention, and events like that help, and also perhaps events like this. Now, what's also important is that the sculpture became an object of academic research. It's not just the embodiment of my philosophical project on the landscape of affordances, but it also became the research project of human movement scientists and ergonomists. They basically started to do experiments on this art installation, comparing how people felt and experienced it, working in our installation as opposed to working in a conventional open office setting. And they published it in one of the best journals in human movement sciences. So the End of Sitting, you can see it as a fountain of youth. You go in like crippled and old, and it won't make you younger, but it will make you fitter. This is the End of Sitting. You work in 8 hours a day, and then we hope in the end you come out as a young god. That would be the ideal way of thinking about what it could do. But of course, that needs further research. So we're basically trying out to see, again, inviting the human movement scientists at the university to explore if working 8 hours per day in the End of Sitting would help you to burn enough calories to stay fit, so that perhaps you don't need to go to the gym anymore. And I can say that this one is the one where you burn most calories. Now, we continue this exploration of possibilities for supported standing. We do material experiments to continue to see what may be material supports for different ways of living in society. We built this cage, and in this cage, in this frame, we are testing all sorts of materials to see what would be working well for supporting standing. Here you see my brother being happy. Because we were testing a new material, a carpet, that he likes very much. And he calls it a king's chair. It feels like a king's chair, he says. So we liked this. We feel it. Always we feel how it works. And then we we made at the headquarters of the Art Fund, the main Art Fund in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we made this follow-up of the End of Sitting out of a different material, and we presented it as a vision on the living room of 2025, the living room without chairs. So at home, you could have this if you want to do away your chairs and not sit anymore that often. Again, it's a small landscape of affordances so that you can keep moving around. Here you see some of the images shot on the installation. It's a very different material. It's very soft and it follows the body. And this is like an exoskeleton, which is the next one of the next steps where we want to move. You see how we were playing with a cat in the landscape and the different positions. So the way to think about this enactive making is to think of our environment as a very rich landscape of affordances that's available and very unexplored. And by engaging and playing with it, you coordinate with the affordances and you can discover new action possibilities that if you are making it ambitiously enough, you can try to change this, the way that we do things standardly. Here we are exploring other materials, trying to find what could work for the library of the future. And this is quite comfortable. It looks difficult. It's easy. Even philosophers can do it. And this one is quite nice too. We're here seeing if this could be in buses and trains and trams as a different way of hanging while you are in the subway or in the bus. Again, it may look more difficult. It's actually quite comfortable.
Nice. Surprisingly nice.
Again, the way always we are very much feeling how it feels to try to find out what could work and what wouldn't work. And that's why we often step in them ourselves. So the philosophical conclusion, before I present another brief project, philosophically I want to bring home the message that skilled intentionality is this coordination with multiple relevant affordances simultaneously. And that if you want to be an active maker, it's about exploring the rich landscape of affordances that's available in the form of life and do it by making life-size experiments. That's often one of the best ways to do it. So finally, affordances are also resources available in our human form of life. And I want to show you a project we did in 2010 at the Venice Biennale that was about affordances of vacant buildings, empty buildings. It was called Vacant NL, and we did it in the Dutch pavilion in the Giardini in Venice. We were invited to make an exhibition about the societal relevance of architecture. And what we said, it's interesting that this building in which we were presenting is vacant 9 months a year. And it's just similar to all the other monuments in the Netherlands that are also vacant and that could be used temporarily in the period that nobody is there. Like this could be used like 6 months a year by other people, but it's not. It's just locked up. Now, interestingly enough, it's on Dutch soil in Venice, so it's an exemplar for the vacancy in the Netherlands as well, this Dutch pavilion. This is how it looks inside normally. When there's no one. And this is just one of the other 10,000 vacant buildings. Often they're beautiful monuments paid for by the people, owned by the government and locked up. And what we wanted to show in Venice was basically, we wanted to make people feel the emptiness of the pavilion as it's vacant 9 months per year, which we did on the ground floor. And then we made a fake wall and the possibility to go up. And when you went up, you saw this enormous sea of vacant buildings. And basically, the potential, we made people feel the potential of all these vacant buildings, and we made a plea for temporary using them. temporary, using them for knowledge development by attracting artists and other makers and researchers from other countries. Here you see how we made it. It's on these small lines, which made the two levels possible. And this is another image of how we made it. It was cut out of styrofoam. And interesting was that we had beautiful residual material that also offered all sorts of possibilities. And of course, the affordances of residual material are really important to use better. And we made a project out of it when one of the directors of a museum in the Netherlands wanted to buy the Venice installation. Then we told him that we couldn't do the Venice installation because that was site-specifically made for the Dutch pavilion and the Venice light, etc. But we could make a vertical equivalent of it using the residual material, and that's basically what you see here on the right-hand side. And this is how it turned out in reality. This is what we built for the museum there. Yes, I think this was it. This is my final slide. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. So, well, it's would be impossible to combine these things, and yet, because this is a panel, it was combined already. You did all present in the same hour, so in a way, almost I would like to pull it apart. But maybe a good place to start, because it continues a little bit the conversation we were having before, is this question of death as a plastic force. So in a way, maybe it will be interesting, Catherine, your feeling about this argument about the design of the afterlife, but
yes,
also,
it was,
not just the afterlife. Yeah,
really fascinating what you said. But I have a question. It seems to me that in the beginning you were quite consistent with the concept of plasticity, showing the proximity between clay. I mean, I don't remember exactly. Sorry, but then in the second part, it was more about fluidity, about virtuality. So, is it the same thing, or did you glide from one like determined concept of plasticity to something more, I don't know, indeterminate?
Yeah. So actually, the intention was to problematize Semper's vision of every plasticity being a replica of that original plastic element, which is clay.
Yes, yes.
Because all the cases, all the accounts that we have encountered were signaling more a fluidity rather than the plasticity of clay, which is kind of a solidification at the end once you put it in the oven, right? Once the vase has a determined shape. So yeah, I think fluidity was a and I was wondering earlier.
Fluidity is not plasticity. You know, that's the
yeah. And we were wondering earlier if the flexibility is maybe closer to fluidity rather than
yes.
to
and at
plasticity.
the same time, I'm sure that you are looking for a new form of death, a new shaping of death, or a shaping power of death. And so I wonder if you might not change your vocabulary, perhaps. I don't know. It's a question.
We moved to fluidity as well in Gangnam and with the case of plastic surgery, because that is also a literal mode of operating there in the actual kind of overabundance of fluid cells and the fluidity of food that is consumed when you can't chew. And then the kind of more metaphoric identity, fluidity.
So this was very interesting. Yes.
And also in terms of death, you saw some images of the soul, our soul binary intervention. We didn't talk much about it, but we developed with a Korean company a machine that, as an alternative to cremation and burial, liquefies the human body. So we wanted to make some parallels between the fluidity, the actual fluidity of the material, and the fluidity, for example, of the circulation of images for example, in the plastic surgery culture.
Perhaps to that end, it's fluidity in service of plasticity, as a kind of force of mobilizing a new body and a new kind of persona.
No, definitely.
Very interesting.
This terminology is very new to us, and we're going to be very flexible.
You should be aware of not, producing that kind of Deleuzian mode of discourse in the end. That would be, maybe it would erase the novelty of what you are presenting, which is fascinating.
Definitely, no, and I think there are a lot of parallels with Derrida too. When you were talking about I was thinking about photography when you were talking about repetition, and in Athens Still Remains, Derrida talks about photography as being death and repetition as being photography. It's a bit mystic there, but
for sure the plasticity of after death is very interesting. May I just ask something to Erik?
Yeah.
I was also wondering about your plasticity, because what we saw was also fascinating, but I was wondering if it was not an invention of a new flexibility, like let's be more efficient if we work, if we stand when we write, we will work more, we will be more exploitable. Yeah. So how do you present this as a progress and not as a regression in a certain sense?
I think in the context of this symposium, I think what makes it interesting is the attempt to see if it's possible to change an entire sociocultural practice, because that's something that we all take for granted, that we are sitting in chairs in academic context. And why is it? And could it be done differently? Could standing become the new norm? So the way I think of as being human, and of how human, what could be the super part of the humanity, is that human is indeed the kind of thing that changes, but it's the sociocultural practices that change, and we go with them. But can we also take the initiative to change a practice? And I think that the material scaffolding for that is quite crucial, otherwise you will never get there. So it's an experiment in that sense, and we don't care about efficiency, to be honest. It's more like a thinking model.
Yes, of course,
if we could live differently, yeah.
But just staying on the same point, more or less the same point. It's true that the project is extremely interesting. I mean, one of the things that interests me is it is somehow an echo of kind of Taylorist studies of maximizing the efficiency of the body, and in particular, there are workers. I mean, you insist on the not sitting as a better way to work, and even I was struck by the office workers wear a kind of business suit. And the researchers wear another kind of suit. Is sort of like a little bit like that you're in a 1920s avant-garde dance group, black, tight, a little bit athletic. And so these two groups, the kind of energetic researchers, athletic, very healthy researchers that will live for a long time, and the workers that they are serving. The loop does seem very tight, and maybe I could suggest as a kind of a provocation, because of course affordances sounds like also we could discuss this in terms of hospitality. It even seems to be very much what affordance is, but hospitality can also have this other side. Yeah. Couldn't it be argued that Whitney Houston and her daughter welcomed the affordance offered by the bathtub to kill themselves in dramatic ways, right? The kind of use or the kind of generosity of the bathtub that your research will never consider, no? So I mean, just to say, let's say, not only would multiple affordances have enormous qualities that are very precious. Let's say not just business qualities, efficiencies and so on, but also, let's say, a fuller range of kind of behaviors. So would you say that the bathtub was
for killing yourself?
Generous to them in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. In the human form of life, we have many skills, and one of the skills that people have is that of doing suicide. Yeah, and there's certain ways that people do it, and one is in bathtubs, another is jumping from buildings, another is jumping in front of trains.
That's
and if you are considering doing a suicide, you will probably read up on these skills, and but it's not something you can practice, of course, but. So the skill, the skill is one of the relata in understanding the richness of the landscape of affordances. So yes, this aspect of the environment that we call a bathtub does offer the possibility for forms of suicide. Yes,
it's very interesting.
Yeah,
so the human landscape of affordances is so rich we often don't realize. Like this place offers possibilities for free running and parkour, and we sit here rather than that we are doing free running and parkour.
Yeah, I mean I think it can be interesting also to think of the previous sessions discussing about domesticity because actually, of course, as you know, the conventional house is the most likely place for you to die. And you have two very strong options for dying. One is to be killed by somebody that once loved you or even thinks that killing you is the very expression of their love. And the other is all of the amazing affordances offered by houses for ways of killing yourself. It's really, it's a disaster zone.
Most of the accidents happen at
yes,
houses, I think, yeah.
But see, maybe with your help we can change it from accident to affordances. In other words, the house is really a battlefield for survival. And of course, in a battlefield for survival, the question of the human comes up. And I wanted to return to the first speaker, and I apologize again for interrupting, and maybe we can now continue that conversation. I have half a question. I noticed that at the beginning, you made a very important argument about the difference between the internal and the external. And I was thinking that at the end, of course, somehow the brain today is what outer space was in the 1960s. It is so in a certain way, the inside of the human brain is bigger than the universe. And I was wondering, to what extent the images that you showed us at the end, these drawings, they remind me very much of religious drawings of the universe. And I'm wondering, is this for you a kind of a conscious act, that if we could draw the most perfect, the most scientific, or the most comprehensive image of the brain, we would indeed be making an image of the universe? So that for you, in a way, one way to remove the gap between the inside and the outside is to find an inside that's bigger than the outside, and then make a picture of it. Is this almost right?
I'm going to reply.
지금 말씀하신 거.
I'm going to reply in Korean, and I agree with one thing that you said. In traditional Chinese and Korean philosophy, we talk about micro-universe, that the human man is a micro-universe, and that's what we have thought for a long time. And I think there is one discipline in Asia that drew a small universe, like you just mentioned, especially in Neo-Confucianism. But when we look at the universe, there's a universe that we look at from the inside, and there's a universe that we look at from the outside. And I want to draw both pictures, and I was unable to express it well through my drawings. But if we look at the structure of our brain, the external and internal part of the brain are connected through a circuit and through the neocortex. And I'd like to develop this further. And the universe that we see from the inside and from the outside, I would like to conceptually integrate the two. And that was what I wanted to show in my picture.
It's if the study of the brain has become such a huge space of research, but I suppose maybe this study of the brain is not yet accompanied by a similar investigation of the brain that we construct between our brains. That is to say, there is a kind of hope in neuroscience that all the secrets could be answered inside the individual brain. So it's a kind of a celebration of the spectacular sort of genius of the brain as a kind of beautiful design and designing machine that represents, as it were, the authority of the human. But I'm wondering to what extent we are more like insects than like humans, in the sense that our brain is much more about the networks between us than the networks inside. And that last idea that you had of the weak link, it seems to me that in the social networks, your concept of the weak link is a very seductive or promising explanation for the enormous mental capacity of social networks that may be more beautiful, more comprehensive, more sort of spectacular, in the sense that outer space is spectacular in the end than the individual human. So in terms of the inside and the outside, do you have also some thoughts about the collective brain?
예, 좋은 그.
That's a very good question. Brain scientists, when they study, they have three different, completely different perspectives and approaches. And the other two speakers talked about Francisco Varela and Eva Thompson and Albano. And they talk about embodied mind. There's the embodied mind perspective. And the brain is not considered to be isolated. We have to think of brain to brain and brain to environment and connected brains all together. And I'm conducting research in this direction too. And on the other side, we have scientists who look at the brain as being completely isolated. And they research the isolated brain, and they try to link it with engineering. And this is the mainstream group. And the perception that I support is cognitive ecology, ecological cognitive science. And as you mentioned, this is brain to brain, the collective brain, social intelligence, and how are they made is what we research. It's not just connecting to the external, but inside one brain, there is already a social network. The social network is already constructed inside. Something that was outside is already inside, and we're connected already. And so the external and the internal are in duplication. It's what Merleau-Ponty expressed as flash. And he's talking about this redundancy and overlapping. And so affordance and autopoiesis and mimesis we can look at that from this perspective, from a humanities and philosophical and artistic point of view, to connect it to brain science. But right now, if we look at the investments that are made in AI, in the engineering part of AI, I think that they're trying to come up with a solution. I agree with what you said, though.
But we should take some from the audience, but I can't help but say that the idea that the social networks are already inside the brain, I'm hoping that Mark Zuckerberg does not realize that, because that would be then the obvious territory that he would seek to occupy. But it makes sense, so much sense, of the idea that Facebook was the place in which the afterlife would be designed. That is to say, it's not a question of placing the afterlife in some computational or representational or technological instrument like Facebook. It's actually about placing it's about maintaining the life that was already only alive in those networks. And the idea that also within the brain, I think, is a kind of great stimulating idea. Who would like the first question?
Thank you for so many brilliant papers. I just wanted to return, though, to the end of sitting. When I saw the picture, you put up the picture of releasing a cat into the space, and I immediately thought, this is play, you know, to return maybe to something that the speakers in the first set were talking about. This is obviously looks like it would be a lot of fun. But then on the other hand, I couldn't help but notice, along with people who have said previously, that this looks like another way of making work more efficient. It looks like a kind of extractive method. And in some ways, it suggests that there is no settled negotiation with power, right? As long as you never resist, then it'll always try to take a little bit more, you know. I can't help but I couldn't help but thinking when I saw those images, my God, can't you just let me sit down? I mean, I'm overstating. I'm being obviously, you know, kind of demonstratively negative. I mean, maybe I'm kind of committing the fallacy that Hannah Proctor brought up earlier, this idea of kind of externalizing all forms of violence, right? You know, there was never any kind of self-inflicted violence. Of course there is. You know, I've been sitting in this chair for who knows how long. But I think throughout these 2 days, I think the coercive element of all of these different areas that we've been bringing up has really been downplayed, and it's troubled me. So I wonder if, maybe perhaps I could open this to anybody, how can we rescue a concept of genuine play, right? There's been a lot of kind of uncertain talk about how play can be exploited or captured. And so obviously people are aware of this, but I just wanted to maybe ask what of the promise of play, right, rather than the kind of reality of it, maybe.
Yes, I would like to say something on this. So, first of all, I would suggest that you remain seated also afterwards a bit longer. But I think the end of sitting is basically something that tries to get people out of their comfort zone. And by being out of their comfort zone, they are being more playful than they would normally be. But that on the side, so you shouldn't forget that this is a physical thinking model. It's an art project. It's not something that's there to be. It tries to show how we could live differently, and it tries to explore that in an experimental way. It's not something that you should worry about that everyone will be forced in. It's a voluntary thing that you can explore. You can explore how you could live differently. Not that we would punish you if you would sit down. It's more a way of seeing what is also possible. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
Koreans know this very well. Up to the 1960s, Koreans slept on the floor, on the ondol floor, and sat on floors, didn't use chairs. And actually, it's only been 30, 40 years since we introduced the chairs and beds in our society. So in Korean apartments, we mix both. So people can sit on the floor and also sit on chairs. And they can sleep on the floor and they can sleep in beds. So it's up to them. They can use their space as they want. And experimenting like this, I think, is a way to save play, to help us move towards play. Because play is, animal behavioralists say that animals, other than sleeping and eating, they play the rest of the time. And by playing, we can move with different affordances. And I think that changing the pattern in which we live is a way for us to recover play in our lives. And it's something that we can look forward to. We have 7 ultimate desires. And a lot of cognitive scientists have said amongst our desires and impulses, we want to look forward to something and we want to explore something to look forward to. And I think maybe this is one way of doing that, reconstructing and redesigning our space. Maybe we need to redesign and reconstruct time, and we need to change networks in that way. That will be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to repeat what I was suggesting yesterday. Couldn't it be 2 points? One, what is play versus what is not play? It's a different decision depending on which framework you have. You can look at somebody and decide that what they are doing is work, but actually from another perspective, it's play. So play is really not a thing by itself, but it's a description of a thing. No? And what does this description have to do with? Couldn't we argue that play, which is always fantasized to be from something earlier, as a child, as an animal, play is something to return to. It's never something in front of you, something that we have lost. But all such fantasies of what we have lost are usually forms of nostalgia for what we never had, and there are very specific desires. Couldn't it be argued that play is how you rehearse killing people and exploiting people? Couldn't you just say, my definition of play is where you suspend the rules of your normal day or life in order to rehearse and develop the skills to kill and exploit.
Like in video games.
Yeah, but it has always been that way, whether it be throwing a ball or playing tennis or playing chess. That all games are not just war games, but really rehearsals for the ability to exploit. And in this sense, this is not yet to disagree with you. It's just to say what's called play is normally absolutely not playful. And what might be play, what might be what you, I think, evocatively describe as a kind of opening up for new potentials, this opening, in theory, could happen anywhere. Exactly, that's why you would call it an opening, is that it arrives without announcement. So, for example, the workplace, the worker, the exploited worker could be the very place in which there is a shocking and playful emergence of that which was not expected. So I'm inclined to be with you and to look for this thing, but I suspect the place where it will be found is not the place we want. And we have every reason to be suspicious of play, since, as was, I think, very well argued yesterday, play has, with the so-called gamification of everyday transactions, play has been structured as the very device of the maintenance of systems of exploitation. So again, I feel like nostalgia for play needs to be replaced with kind of the idea of a kind of welcoming or openness to something unexpected. And that might relate back to this idea of affordance. And I think the interesting thing is whether affordance can be, real affordance is something designed or something that works against design, or is always against or beyond design.
How do you mean that?
Well, if I say this chair will make you feel good, or yes, it will, but without surprise. I mean, I think this is why the gesture of couldn't I just sit down? Because actually now there is a system in which sitting down is criminalized, and actually you don't afford that opportunity. Right? You're the king of affordance, but actually that's not going to be afforded to you.
Yes, we try to afford everything except for there being chairs, but that's because people tend to fall back in their habitual behaviors. As soon as there is a chair or possibility to sit, they will just start sitting.
Yeah.
And that's at this. If you want to show them different possibilities, then it's better to temporarily, at least, have the chairs completely out, so that they can explore what else there is.
No, I think it's as you yourself said, it's an experiment. You're carrying out a kind of test, a very controlled test. We have another question. Yes.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
Yeah, no, just a quick comment. There was an image that repeated itself yesterday, and that was of Charlie Chaplin's movie As the Worker. And the key moment of that, the scene that was talked about was displaying how machines reconfigure the behaviors of the body. And so I think, if we are thinking of ways to remold the human and to think new forms of labor, I think that this question of reconditioning the body and questioning the habits is, it might have, I don't know, potentially sinister dimensions, because I think that's kind of what's being talked about. And but I think that there also is quite a long history of architectural experimentation, where like Arakawa Ginza's "We've decided not to die." There's literally this belief that we die because of the way that we live. And so I don't know. It was just it's something that I wanted to bring up yesterday, to think like, well, can we think of a post-labor condition when we still have flat floors? And I don't know if that's, well, I don't know.
So with this comment, perhaps there was a question over there. Maybe we can mix two questions and answer together.
Yeah.
죄송한데 한국말로.
Can I speak in Korean? I'm sorry. Professor Shin said earlier that there are 4 areas of the brain, and if you don't use all of them actively, you might develop Alzheimer's disease or dementia. I'm from the perspective of career design, I think that rather than being good in everything, it's good if somebody is talented in one area, and those kind of people seem to live longer without developing dementia. But in this case, is it really necessary for everybody to venture into all different areas and use all different areas of the brain? If you look at talented people, these people seem to be these people seem to live healthy for a long time, and people who are engaged in every single thing doesn't seem to be so healthy and live so long. In the past, we could do an IQ test to evaluate, but these days we have what we call a multiple IQ, and as long as you're good at one thing and you can develop that, it was enough for a long and healthy life. But you seem to think otherwise. Can you answer my question?
So can I answer that? So let me answer this question. I don't want to be too long, but do you have to do one thing well, or do you have to do many things well? I think that's not connected with the fact that our brain is connected in a network. There's a person doing one thing using a part of a brain, and there are other people who multitask and they use a certain part of their brain too. So it's a different category.
Well, I just thought that was a very beautiful conclusion for the conference, and probably we will say something, but just a small comment from Beatrice and Anton and Nicholas and Nick and myself, that we could not be more appreciative of Bartomeu and the museum and you and the team, and to be here in Seoul for this conversation has been incredibly important for us, and we have learned many lessons, and thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here.
I'd like to thank all the speakers and panelists, as well as Professor Wigley for his excellent job moderating this panel. With this, we will conclude Superhumanity International Symposium. This symposium was co-organized. This was possible because of Chris Partner and all the departments in MMCA. I'd like to thank everybody involved for their hard work. I'd also like to thank all the participants for staying on until the very end of the two-day event. In front of this room, a wine reception will be hosted by the Spanish Embassy. I hope you have a good time during the reception.
퇴장하시면 그 멀티 프로젝트 홀 문이 닫힐 예정이거든요. 놓고 가시는 짐 없도록 주의해 주시기 바랍니다.